Hello, I'm Kai Chan. I'm a professor and Canada Research Chair at UBC in the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability. And I'm a founder of Cosphere and also of this podcast, Small Planet Heroes. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Teika Newton. But before that, I want to introduce my co-host, Sam Blackwell.
Hi, I'm Sam Blackwell. I'm the newest addition to the Chance Lab. I'm in my first year of my master's at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability, spending my time thinking about human-nature connections, urban birds, nest predation, and community-based science. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. And today, we're going to talk to Teika Newton. Teika and I know each other from actually many years ago. She's currently the executive director at the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation in Kenora, Ontario, a beautiful town, where she had previously worked as the International Watershed Coordinator. Before that, she's had a whole bunch of different roles that we're going to touch on in this podcast, including being the managing director of the Climate Action Network in Canada, CANRAC.
Besides work, Teika is an extremely community-oriented individual, volunteering with Living Lakes Canada to monitor Breakneck Lake in Ontario, working as a school board trustee for the Keewatin Patricia School Board, and presenting at dozens of workshops.
And she's had some really important roles in the climate and environmental movement, both at local and provincial or federal scales. But you might not know about the work that she's done because her work has often been behind the scenes. And that's the way that change happens. We often, it's often attributed to one person or to a couple of people or to an agency or an organization, when really a lot of the really important work was done already by folks who you may not have heard of. And Teika is one of those people. You may have heard of her. You probably have heard of her. But even if you haven't, you probably haven't seen all the things that she has done to enable stuff to happen. I know this firsthand because with Cosphere, she was one of the first people that I reached out to, and she was one of the people who really got things rolling by connecting us with other folks, like at EarthNet, for example. So today we're going to talk to Teika about her journey, about how she has navigated in and out of science, how she's thought about science and system change, and how she thinks about it now.
If there's a pit in your stomach from the way that we live, you'll want it to change, something's going to give. Well, we've got stories that'll give us a glimpse of better ways, reconnect everything. We're small planet heroes, small planet heroes.
Hi, Teika.
Hi. So nice to be with you.
We're so happy to have you here.
Yeah. So Teika, maybe just to get started, you did your bachelor's degree from UBC in plant biology and then jumped straight into a master's of science in evolutionary biology.
And this relates to us because both Sam and I did our undergrads in biology.
Exactly. And so we were just wondering, what was your decision process like when you decided to get a master's degree?
Okay, this is a really rather amusing question. So I went to UBC for both my degrees. I did take a year off in between the two of them. When I finished my undergrad, I knew, well, I guess to back it up a little bit, when I was in high school, my only aspiration with respect to career planning was that I wanted my PhD in something to do with science, probably biology. That was what I was passionate about. And I really was driven by care for the environment, care for the natural world. I ended up choosing to come to the West Coast in the mid-1990s because of the war in the woods, the battle to try to save the old growth on the West Coast forest. And throughout my undergrad, I spent a lot of time volunteering in environmental causes and things like that. So I knew that that was the direction that I wanted to go. I wasn't sure if that was an academic path or not. But when I was doing my undergrad at UBC, I got really interested in speciation and evolutionary biology and understanding how things come to be, like these big system change processes on an evolutionary timescale. but I needed a break. So I took a year off and decided to just work at random odd jobs that I knew would compel me to want to go back to school the following year. And so that's what I did. I ended up coming back to do my master's degree and studied with Jeanette Witten in the botany department, working on speciation in a cluster of California tarweeds, trying to understand what drives speciation among those plants. It was really a lot of fun. And I had considered going on to do a doctorate afterward, but realized that the academic path wasn't quite my calling. Like, it was something I could have done, but I felt that there was something more I needed to be doing in the world. And as it turns out, I guess I figured that out eventually along the way over a couple of decades of puttering around.
Yeah, that's really inspiring for me because I'm kind of similar where I envisioned myself getting a PhD one day, but now that I'm in my master's, I'm wondering, is it the right route for me? So yeah, it's so nice to be able to hear about other people's experience toying with the same question.
Yeah, and you're already preempting our question, which is like, how did you find your purpose or call, And so after your master's, then you went on to a role as a genomic technologist.
Yeah, that was a pretty pragmatic choice. I went to work for the Michael Smith Genome Sciences Center while I was still finishing my master's. And that was largely, a financial decision. I needed to work, but it was also such a cool place to spend a few years. So I was actually there for about 5 years. That lab was the first of its kind in Canada, doing genomics, high-level genomics research, so contributing to the Human Genome Project. Members of my lab contributed to decoding the SARS-1 genome. We were doing all kinds of genomic mapping and sequencing, not just for cancer tumor tissue, but also for all kinds of biologically and economically important species, for medicine, for commercial applications, for all sorts of things. And it was really an interesting and dynamic place to be. So I put in 5 years there, and it was well worth it in every way. And the only reason I ended up leaving was because my husband and I ended up moving out of province. And so we moved back home to our small town where we now live.
Yeah.
I was in evolutionary biology for a few years too. That's where I did my PhD. And it wasn't for me. It wasn't even intended, actually, that I would do my PhD in evolution. I set out to do it more in ecology, but I kind of just made a mistake in a sense, or a historical accident, I guess. And so for you, you went on and you started working at Dovetail Resources, which is a consulting and advocacy company that works largely with First Nations communities to build economic development projects while also advocating for better social and economic conditions. So were you getting I get this sense that for both you and I, there was something about the study of life and how it's unfolded that was alluring, but not quite all there was, right? In terms of that purpose. Am I reading into that for you?
Yeah, I think that's really true. And actually, as you were talking, I was just reflecting back on an experience I had in grad school. We used to have a discussion group, like a lunch hour discussion group, the evolution discussion group. Graduate students and professors and some undergrad students. My younger sister was in her 4th year of her undergrad, and she attended that. And we would discuss papers, peer-reviewed papers of the day, just things that were interesting to us. And I remember having a debate one lunch hour about the role of society and social science in pure science, in Western pure science. And there was a real bifurcation in views. Keep in mind, this is the late 1990s. It's a different era, but I would say there was a real patriarchal colonial mindset in the things that I was hearing out of some colleagues. And it just made me feel like I'm not seeing my own context here. I'm not seeing the culture that I came from in small northwestern rural northwestern Ontario. Treaty 3, the community that I come from it's a settler community, but it's in the heart of Treaty 3 territory, which is the Anishinaabe territory. And I grew up in this context where like Indigenous governance, Indigenous rights, Indigenous worldview was so deeply infused in how I understood the world. And I was not seeing that reflected in the science in the ways that we were talking about science, particularly in that discussion group, but kind of overall across all of science. I can also reflect that in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a big shift underway in the biological sciences, where a lot of that sort of historical lens of like natural history, going out into the field and just sampling and exploring, was kind of getting supplanted by the drive for lab-driven research. Really different context, and it was so dissociated from what I felt passionate about. Like, the whole reason I went into science was because I had spent so much of my life outside paddling on the lake and wondering what made the lake work the way it works, and what the relationships are among all the different creatures and plants that I see outside my door. And I didn't know how to take all of that context and distill it down into the type of lab science that I was kind of feeling was the dominant theme of where things were going at that time. Kind of ironic that I went to work in a genomics lab.
Yeah.
But it was, it's really, I think it was still a really useful experience to see that side of the science, and then to leave it and decide to come back home and work with Kyler at Dovetail, doing consulting work that got me back out on the land and getting more into a space of appreciating Indigenous worldview and values, and just like reorienting my focus and my gaze away from just this singular way of knowing.
I can definitely like echo those sentiments. I think that's one of the big reasons why I came to IRES, the Institute for Resources, Environment, Sustainability, because it's such an interdisciplinary program. Like, I'm learning so much about different worldviews that I'd never even considered. And yeah, I mean, not to say that the field has perfected kind of incorporating Indigenous worldviews, but I think we've taken some good steps towards it. And yeah, it makes me really excited to see what the future holds.
Yeah. And so after being at Dovetail for a little while, it wasn't long before you took that role, and this is where I first met you, I think, as a research coordinator at the University of Manitoba for the Common Ground Research Forum, right? And so here, I guess this was probably the coming together of your science and your thinking about ecosystems with that connectedness with people. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that there were a few things that had been percolating in the background that I hadn't even realized were my skill set or my interests. And, it's really only in adulthood, like in my 40s, that I started to reflect back on how all the pieces eventually locked together to create whatever this career path is that I have followed. But I think there was always I've always had an interest in community well-being and community connections. I can talk a bit more about where that comes from, but maybe that's a bit of a rabbit hole. We don't need to go down there right now. But suffice to say, it comes from childhood, from growing up in a really unusual way, living off grid, and like needing to figure out how to do social connection when you don't have it readily available. I think when I came back to Kenora. So I left Kenora to go to university with this grand intention of going out to study, explore, and save the world. I wanted to do grand environmental work. And when I ended up coming back, I had a bunch of experiences of having tried and tested different things out on the West Coast. But I also came back with new eyes and a new ability to see what the social deficits and problems were in my community. And a lot of them, like, this is a place that is intrinsically tied to the natural environment. But the social complexity of the challenges that people face living here is so prevalent that it kind of, I wouldn't say that it becomes more important than environmental issues, but it's that they're so interwoven. There's no way you can address environmental challenges without addressing the social side of it. And I think that's what I learned in the Common Ground project. So the Common Ground Research Forum project was a 6-year Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council funded project through the University of Manitoba. And my former employer, Kyler Cotton at Dovetail Resources, was one of the board members for that, like one of the community board members to that project. So that was kind of how I got introduced to the Common Ground work in the first place. It was through Kyler. But that project was such a beautiful marriage among Western and Indigenous worldviews and science, social science, community development, economic development, sustainability. It was kind of like the sweet spot of all the things that I cared about. It was a great experience getting to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. You ended up leaving and you ended up going to work with Transitions Initiative Kenora. And in kind of researching this, I was wondering if you could tell us more about the organization.
Yeah, okay. So the Common Ground Research Forum was a 6-year project. It was just a grant-funded project. So it ended in June of 2015. And that's actually how I met Kai, because I invited him to be a keynote speaker at our closing conference. So we met in the lead up to that conference, and then he came to Kenora and we hung out a bit.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, the energy at that conference was, like, to me, the right kind of energy, because I'd been in
Really good.
Yeah, I've been in spaces that were more dominated by the ecological thinking, and there wasn't that connectedness, right, on the social side with Indigenous worldviews. It was obvious from the way that you ran that meeting and the way that people talked to each other there that, people were seeing each other eye to eye, even though they were coming from very different perspectives. And that's a rare thing to create, and it felt like a special group.
That project was magical. Honestly, it was so magical. And I can't take the credit for that. I mean, I was the coordinator and the convener. But so much of what built that feeling came from the goodwill of so many different community members. We did 42 different community-led projects. So that was members of the community taking on $5,000 to $10,000 projects for a short period of time. And it was across a wide array of topics. So it just had to be something that dealt with cross-cultural collaboration around sustainability for economy, environment, or society. So that's pretty open-ended. And it was because we required, the only caveat was that we needed to have that cross-cultural piece in there. So there had to be Indigenous worldview represented alongside Western worldview. And it meant that there was a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of learning that was happening in real time between people who maybe have lived in the same community all their lives, but never actually understood one another and never listened to one another, never sat down to share a meal together or to have any kind of experiential learning together. We would take people out on the land and go do guided hikes on heritage land. We would go out on little boat cruises together. We would do community art projects. It was a whole bunch of different things that we did that just created space for people to come together and listen to one another. Kind of like that idea of a living library, where you can go and check out a person and learn about their life history. But it was that across the whole community and across 42 different projects that we did. And over the space of 5 or 6 years, doing that kind of small infusion of intentional community building transforms a community. And it was really palpable. When you came to visit in 2015, that was definitely the pinnacle of that work. It was so beautiful to see it happen. What we learned subsequently is that when that coordination disappears, the momentum also disappears. And I can say lots about that because that's been the experience of my life since then. The last 10 years, I've been a coordinator, and I now understand just how valuable that role is, having somebody to coordinate things. Yeah. Now, I wanted to get back to Transition Initiative Kenora because you'd asked me about that. So this is quite a story. In late 20, so where to start? Okay, so with the federal omnibus budget bill that came in what year was that? 2011 or 2012? When the federal government under Stephen Harper decided to defund the experimental lakes area, a number of people in Kenora got really passionate about saving the ELA. So we worked together with a number of proponents from Winnipeg and other places that are really heavily invested in the experimental lakes area, which is it was at the time a federal research facility that is just east of Kenora. One of the longest uninterrupted climate data sets in the world related to fresh water, but they have a meteorological station that they monitor just weather data every single day since the late 1960s. And it's one of the clearest trend lines that we have for the impacts of climate change on boreal lakes worldwide. It's really an impressive facility, 58 freshwater lakes that are set aside for science.
And it was just basically written out of the budget, right? And so this is interesting, right? Because it directly parallels, you were just talking about the 6-year project that did so much good in that community. But because it was a science project, it was allocated for a finite amount of time, right? The 6 years, after which time it closes. Now, the experimental lakes area was supposed to be an ongoing thing, but then for political reasons, effectively, it just shut down.
That was the risk, that it would just shut down and we'd lose all of that repository of such valuable information. And it's not just valuable to Canada. This is a global, one-of-a-kind freshwater research facility.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of rallying to try to save ELA. And in the end, the province of Ontario stepped in with some bridge funding that got the facility through until the International Institute for Sustainable Development took it over, and it now operates through IISD as an independent private entity, I guess. As it's a not-for-profit, but science research station still, and it's really thriving. It's doing fantastically well, and has really flourished under IISD. But that was a big learning experience for people in Kenora about that interplay between politics and civil society and science. We learned a lot. We learned that everyday people can make a change. They can be really important agents of change. Our voices matter. And we learned about the capriciousness of politics. How to navigate political advocacy. So that was all kind of the context that was underway in Kenora in, that period of 2011, 2012, early 2013. And then in late 2013, around, I would say August of that year, we heard rumors out of North Bay that TransCanada, so what's now TC Energy, then was TransCanada Corporation, was considering a project to pipe diluted bitumen out of Alberta across Canada from west to east through a retrofitted gas pipeline. They called the project Energy East.
Right.
It's been in the news. And those of us who had joined forces to try to save ELA broadly overlapped with a group of local people who were also interested in things like urban homesteading and building green and passive houses and, just general environmental interests. And we coalesced as a group under this umbrella of Transition Initiative Kenora. We were actually interested in energy transition planning at the community level, but ended up going all in on a campaign to stop a pipeline. And that's what occupied my life for the next few years.
I mean, you hit us right on the nail. We were going to ask you, how much time and effort was put into fighting for something like a transition into these clean energy facilities or home improvements versus fighting against something like the pipeline. And I guess it was mostly spent fighting against this pipeline.
It's both at the same time.
Oh, man.
When these natural resource projects are coming down the pipeline, so to speak, and, literally, they're such juggernauts that you kind of can't focus on the baby steps for a 50-year plan, right? For changing the whole economy until you've dealt with that juggernaut.
Kind of, but you kind of also don't have the luxury of not doing that.
Yeah.
But in this moment of transition, so the energy transition from this fossil fuel-based economy that has grown up since the 1850s, it is the basis of our global economy. And because of climate change, we are compelled to embrace clean energy and force that transition in one way or another, ideally in a managed, stepwise, considered way that mitigates harm to societies, to vulnerable people, and helps move us incrementally in the direction we need to go. That's the ideal way to see this happen. We had to be building that, and we had to be focused on how to do that at the community level in ways that it actually impacts people. But at the same time, this pipeline project had a definite time frame, and it required a lot of attention as well. And so when the Common Ground Research Forum project ended in June of 2015, at that point I decided that I was just going to devote all of my time to Transition Initiative Kenora, which was on Fridays we'd host green drinks. That was the community gathering where we talk about the passive solar house we're in the midst of building. Like, showcasing renewable energy technologies and hosting green fairs and all that kind of thing. So that would be 1 or 2 days a week. And then all the other days of the week, amidst parenting and gardening and homesteading, living my life, I was, mounting a campaign to try to stop a pipeline. I was very busy.
And how did those two parts interact? Other than just demanding too much of your time? Like, did the reaction against the Energy East pipeline, did that help to bring new people into the conversation about thinking in a more progressive, forward-looking way, and vice versa? Or was there more of a kind of contradiction between them?
I don't think there was a contradiction between them. I think in some ways they were quite compartmentalized, and they kind of needed to be in a way. Yeah, I have never really thought about this in this way, but a lot of so while I was doing the pipeline organizing, I was also learning a lot about campaigning. I had never been a campaigner. I had tangential interactions with a lot of campaigners over the years. While I was at UBC during my undergrad, I was the office manager and ran the Student Environment Center. So I had a really good grasp of campaigning and advocacy and activism, but that wasn't really my skill set until Energy East came along. And so I was learning about how to build a campaign, how to build a base, how to communicate, how to use all the different digital and social tools to build that base and to do the messaging and do the communications and all that kind of stuff. So that was all very new to me, but that's not how I saw Transition Initiative Kenora. The work we were doing there was not about building a list or building some kind of like inauthentic, artificial, short-term engagement strategy to move people up a ladder of engagement. That wasn't what I was interested in. That was real, authentic, community-based relationship work that, it's sustained to this day. People that I worked with there are still people who are central in my life, and we help one another. The fact that I have the lapel mic that I have right now is because of somebody I knew from back then. All of that sort of thing that's what's so critically important for building the webs of relationship that sustain us in communities. So I think that was the Transition Initiative Kenora work that was at the foundation of our work there. That community-based building was really important. The pipeline advocacy, in some ways, was a bit in tension with that because it did kind of eclipse the name for the organization. So Transition Initiative Kenora started to be affiliated with the pipeline campaign. And that's why you can't find anything about it online anymore. We ended up having to just scrap the organization in the end because it was so tightly wed to the identity around the Energy East fight by the end of the Energy.
Yeah, that's one of the tensions that I was imagining. But I can imagine that there would have been some really positive outcomes of trying to do both of them, right? Because so often environmentalists are critiqued as always being against things. But your organization was, by name, for something, right? And you were starting to show the ways that we can live in a fossil-free future, fuel-free future. Right. And so that was probably, I can imagine that would have been alluring to people who were like, it's not realistic to not have fossil fuels. Right. But you've got these demonstration projects that show the way.
Yeah. And the way that we built the campaign, the Energy East campaign in Northwestern Ontario in the Treaty 3 territory, there were intervener groups basically from the Manitoba border right through to Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario. And I would go out and meet with each of them. Often they were First Nations, so it was individual First Nation chief and council or grassroots groups in those communities. And I would go out and we would have lunch together. We would have a community meeting. We would listen to one another. I would hear what their concerns were. I would try to, provide insights that I had, or if I knew of ways that they could meet their resource capacity needs, I would offer that. But, just trying to build those relationships that then became like hand-holding in solidarity with one another. It was like holding hands across the territory. But the same conversations, like in those same sessions, we may talk about Energy East, but we might also talk about how you could put a solar array on the arena in your community. And so we were having these really generative, organic conversations about the transition and what it means if you are a small, rural, remote town, if you are a chief and council, if you're elders or youth in a First Nation. Like, how do you do these things? And where do you get the capacity? Where do you get the money? How do you get the expertise into your community? And because I was working on a national campaign, I was starting to meet national groups. So other environmental organizations across the country who also had connections with other Indigenous organizations across the country. And I was able to make connections. So the people I was working with to build their Energy East interventions in Treaty 3, I could then also introduce them to like the Indigenous Environmental Network or Sacred Earth Solar, different organizations that I would meet along the way, different friends and allies. We're all, like, every person is multidimensional. We're not just a single entity. So if somebody you meet in the context of fighting a pipeline, that's the point of contact where you come together, but you get to learn all about that person and the wide array of skills and interests they have. And I think my special magical skill is that I love people's stories, and I kind of collect their biographies and figure out how they can all fit together.
That's so beautiful.
And as somebody who's benefited from that, like I can say it, like I do think that's a superpower. It's obvious. Like, not everybody has that. You've obviously invested in it, and you can tell. Like it feels like you understand people and who might get along and how their visions of the world might come together, and making those connections is magical.
Yeah, truly a small planet hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to cultivate that skill in yourself, have some parents who make you live way out in the bush, off grid, with no phone when you're a child into your teenage years, and you will have to learn those skills to be able to appear normal to your peers.
Okay, well, can we dig in just a tad bit more with the Energy East pipeline? So you presented directly to the Ontario Energy Board. And so I was just wondering, kind of, what was that coordination between these governmental officials and then your community, and translating the science into ways that these decision makers can understand and apply it? Can you tell us about that experience?
Sure. So I mentioned that in that late sort of summer, early fall of 2013, we first heard about this project. TransCanada held like a traveling roadshow open house in September of 2013. And they came to Kenora. They had their big trucks, their flatbed trucks with their glossy banner displays, and they had a conference hall rented out and an open house. And so several of the Transition Initiative Kenora crew went to that open house, and we had heard from North Bay about their really cool, funny gag that they had played. So North Bay had an affiliation with the Yes Men. The Yes Men were like a campaign communications sort of kind of like Adbusters, or like a guerrilla media group kind of. And they had gone to their open house, their TransCanada open house, wearing T-shirts that looked like the TransCanada employees' shirts, only instead of saying TransCanada on the logo, it said Save Canada. And it was an interlocking like water droplet and earth instead of the TransCanada gas logo. That was very clever. So we thought we would replicate that. We tried, and it was a dismal failure, and we felt so out of our depth. We didn't know what we were talking about. We didn't have our facts straight. We just didn't know enough. So having been humbled in that experience, I decided, okay, I'm going to treat this as though I'm going back to school. And for the next 6 months, I will learn everything I possibly can about the Canadian energy sector. And that was basically what I did for the next 6 months. It was like studying for my comps for a PhD and learning everything I could about how energy projects are permitted and regulated, how the National Energy Board works, how energy markets work, how oil and gas extraction and refining happens, what the transportation routes are. It was like I
Wow.
learned everything I could get my hands on and read voraciously. So by the time the spring rolled around and the hearings were starting to be discussed, I was in a much better position to be able to speak to this. And I had made contact with some people, with other campaigners across the country. I'm trying to remember how exactly it all rolled out, but I think Lead Now had a day called Defend. It was some day of defense. Defend our communities, defend our something or other. And it was some kind of response to the Harper government, like the clampdown on science and the muzzling of government scientists. It was defend our communities, defend something. Anyhow, I did a webinar series that day, and I just sort of randomly cold called some people who I thought would be interesting speakers, including Tad Homer Dixon. Zipporah Bertman. Like, these were not people I knew. They were just people whose words I had read, and I found them compelling. So I wrote letters to them, and they all agreed to come and speak.
That's
So
awesome.
it worked out really well. So by the time the Ontario Energy Board came to listen to community opinions, so the Ontario Energy Board was soliciting input from communities across Ontario to help inform its response to the question of the Energy East project. As a province, Ontario doesn't have a say in regulating an interprovincial federal project, but they are able to be an intervener, basically, and provide their own testimony, their own evidence. And so the way they went about gathering that evidence was to do these community listening tours. And I went and presented to that. And that really was kind of what kickstarted our campaign.
Oh, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way that you, one, accepted and embraced the failure, in a sense, to reorient, right? To re-strategize, to come about it in a different way. And it so gets at the heart of what this season is about, that your next step was research, right? A really deep dive and understanding this system and how it works, so that you knew what you were going to fight for and how you were going to fight for it within the system that just structures our lives. It's perfect for what we were hoping to talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
So my organization was able to file an application to intervene in the regulatory review process. We were able to get legal counsel through EcoJustice, which is a national environmental charity, law charity. So they provided legal counsel. I had Dina Tuttle and Charles Hatt as my legal companions in that campaign. And then, because I was part of this national chain of communication, I guess. Like, I was linked in at this point with national environmental organizations, and just kind of had my finger on the pulse of what was going on nationally. Through that, I came to know Mike D'Souza, who was a reporter at the time at the National Observer, and he was able to share with me some information that he got about a not quite proper meeting that a TransCanada lobbyist had with the National Energy Board review panel once the review had already started, and it contravened the code of conduct for the board. So we were able to file a notice of motion with the National Energy Board to basically use its own processes to stop the review and reset it. and call for a reset of the board itself, that termination of like nullifying all of the evidentiary record. Like, it was just a number of setbacks that we were able to force on the regulatory review process. But I mean, none of that would have been possible if it hadn't been for the interconnectedness of all the different campaigns. And I think, again, that like, I don't want to make it sound like it's all on me. It isn't, but like that ability to hold authentic relationship with a lot of different people, and just build these webs of interconnection. Had I not had that approach to doing this work, I wouldn't have had that connection with Mike. I wouldn't have had the connection with eco-justice. I wouldn't have had all these different interlocking relationships that were necessary to give me the pieces that my organization needed to be able to do what it did. And then at the same time, had I not been an expert in the NEB process by that point, I wouldn't have known what the intervention points were, where we could actually tackle the regulatory process itself. But
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, because any one of us, our organizations, we're too small, too limited. We have a particular purpose. We have a particular set of things that we're good at. And the complex problems that we are trying to struggle through are bigger than that, right? So it necessitates that kind of a networked approach. And it requires that those networks are founded on strong, genuine relations, like you were talking about.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue into your time with CanRec, given this kind of national level network, right?
Yeah, so that Climate Action Network Canada, you were the managing director there. That must have been a bit of a turn from such a fight in a particular place against a particular project to then have this nationwide scope.
It was really stepwise. Okay. So a real stepwise progression. So I, over the course of the Energy East project, because I became connected with all these different national organizations that were all advocating for positive policy to support the energy transition. So they were climate organizations and energy organizations, and we were all focused on whatever array of interventions we could manage, all, pulling all the levers to be able to affect change. But around the time, so like in 2017-ish, when the Energy East process was really getting very technical and wonky and going through that regulatory review, at the same time we were fighting other infrastructure projects, also going through regulatory reviews. And it was really clear that policy was the avenue that we should be pursuing. We had a new federal government that was very open to developing climate policies. So there was a lot of openness to having environmental organizations advocate to the federal government for good climate policies. So on the margins of the Energy East campaigning, all those groups, or many of those groups, also were starting to make investments in developing their national policy chops. And so I became really involved in that side of the work. So by 2017, or like even late 2016, I was doing about half and half. I was doing half like this infrastructure campaign, but the other half of the time I was working really on thinking about how to build a carbon pricing system or how to build a clean electricity system, like the big transformational policy changes that would be necessary to drive the social and economic changes that we wanted to see happen. And so that kind of just all evolved into, once the Energy East campaign, once that project was done, like when TC Energy pulled the plug on the application in October of 2017, that project no longer existed. So I started doing some contract work for Climate Action Network. I went there originally in 2017 to help rebuild the membership. So Climate Action Network it's Canada's oldest and largest network of organizations with a mandate to work in climate change. At the time when I had started there, my friend Kat was the executive director. She was rebuilding the organization, getting funding in place, pulling in the membership and strengthening the relationships among the members. I think there were about 90 members on paper, but only about 60 of them were really active and engaged. So I came in, and that was my focus for the first year, was rebuilding the membership network. By the time I left, we had 150 organizations, and they were really well networked together. It was all about building those authentic relationships of trust. And like doing that same work I had done at the local level on the Common Ground Project, the same work I had done nationally along the Energy East right-of-way, same thing at Climate Action Network, building that network of organizations of a wide diversity, to bring in a bunch of different skill sets and a bunch of different perspectives, a bunch of different local experiences, bringing in diaspora and international experiences, just so many different perspectives, and helping to inform the work. So I did that for the first year. And then in the second year I was there, I became the national policy manager, and I helped to direct all of Climate Action Network's advocacy and input on developing the 60 plus policies that formed the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. So worked on all that. And then eventually I became the managing director, looking after HR and policy strategy and fundraising. It's all about all the things. And so I basically, covered every base at that organization in my time there.
And how, as you move through those different roles, you've got your focus on the network explicitly when you were membership campaign coordinator, and then the policy. So you're like moving to thinking about the content of the policy, I assume, as well as how to get it done, and then to deal with the organization as a whole. Like, what felt right there among those roles? Did they all work equally well? Like, and how did they speak, coming back to that, your own personal purpose and calling? Like, how did they speak to that?
It worked really well when there were two of us directing. So Kat Abreu was the executive director, and I was the managing director. And Kat, for anyone who knows her, she is an absolute powerhouse, and she's brilliant and so articulate, such an excellent public face for the organization, for the movement as a whole in Canada. And she is one of the warmest people I've ever met, like just such a genuine, authentic, warm person to be around. So she carried like that sort of ambiance of the very embodiment of the type of energy that we were trying to foster in climate work in Canada, building trust and care, leading with love first. She and I would both say often that acting on climate is an act of love. Absolutely, we're doing this work out of love for humanity and love for the earth, love for one another. That's what drives us to do the work. And so the two of us, I felt, we were a good team. We worked really well together. Kat made the decision to leave Climate Action Network and start her own organization that had more of an international focus. So she ran Destination Zero for a couple of years, and I stayed at Climate Action Network to keep it moving forward and into the next chapter, and recruiting more people and getting it set up for the next generation. And then when it felt like the timing was right, I decided to step back and come back to my hometown and do sort of more local-based work. But now I'm back here with all of this lifetime of experience in having done networking and convening and working nationally and working internationally. And I recognize that even though I'm here in this small, rural, remote town in northwestern Ontario, no place is isolated. Like, everything is interconnected, and all the work that we do locally still has impact nationally and internationally. And that's the milieu that I'm in now.
Yeah, I think that's so important to kind of be reminded of, especially with like the political context right now with everything going on in the States. I think it's so important to kind of turn to your community and rely on them for support. And I think in my kind of generation, I see a lot of people with that want to find their community. I think social media has played a role in somewhat isolating people in a different way. But yeah, I mean, particularly me, like I'm going into community-based research because of this want to build trust between people. And I think that's just such a great reminder to hear.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a really interesting way to get into that role at the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation, to have that national scale and systems view of how these various processes play out. Like, I can only imagine that has enabled you to be very strategic. You've got all these assets, right? Like, in terms of knowledge of how the system works, but also all the relationships with these folks that you would have worked with through climate and other issues over the decade plus, because you never actually left Kenora, did you? Even when you were working with CanMac, you were still in Kenora.
I've worked remotely from my home since 2006.
Wow.
You were ahead of the game with the pandemic, hey?
Totally. The pandemic hit and it had no impact on my work, which was really strange. But aside from, then having more people in the house using more broadband. So that required some attention. But yeah, it's really interesting, the moment that we're in right now. Sam, you mentioned the situation unfolding both of the border.
Yeah.
That is having dramatic material impact on the work that I do day to day.
Yeah.
And it's really such a complicated situation.
Yeah, because with LOWWSF, you guys are working with, what's the state again? Sorry.
So Minnesota.
Minnesota,
Lake of the Woods. Lake of the Woods is a fairly large inland lake. We call it the Other Great Lake. But it's right in the corner of Ontario where we meet Manitoba and Minnesota.
Right.
So about 60% of the basin of the watershed is in Ontario, but 40% is in Minnesota, and like a little sliver is in Manitoba. So yeah, we work really closely with our colleagues in Minnesota, and because it's an international boundary, we're also working with international colleagues at the federal level in the United States and Canada, and with tribal nations in Minnesota, and with Indigenous nations on the Canadian side of the border as well. So it truly is an international context. And the situation that we're facing right now is just so much rampant uncertainty and erosion of capacity at such a precipitous rate that every day is filled with new complexities and new uncertainties about how we move things forward. I would say, like, at the end of December, I was feeling fantastic about how 2025 was shaping up, because for the first time ever, we had all the pieces in place to truly launch an international interagency collaborative water quality monitoring network this year. I spent months last year setting this thing up, convening all these different agency partners from the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the Ontario government, the Manitoba government, Environment Canada, the Canada Water Agency, getting everybody, Grand Council Treaty 3, Red Lake Nation, the Science Museum of Minnesota, all these different partners together who don't have the freedom necessarily, or the ability, or the capacity, or time to meet with one another on their own. So often an agency of government doesn't have full liberty to be able to go and just randomly talk to another agency of another government without having some kind of political directive to do so. But I, as a civil society organization, can pull them into a conversation with each other and do that kind of convening that then helps foster cooperation. And so we had this amazing project all put together, and now I honestly don't know if it'll be able to get off the ground, because we don't know who can still contribute. We don't know, like, physically which people are still there, but we also don't know whether there's a funding commitment available anymore among some of those partners. And it seems that every day things are in flux. Will we have tariffs? Will we not? Are we retaliating? Are we not? Can we cross the border? Can we not? So it's really challenging. And Kai, I think you said in your comments just a few minutes ago about my ability to understand the system. I think that's what's falling apart right now. Like, we don't understand the system anymore because the system is crumbling. So when the system crumbles, what do you have what do you hold on to maintain, like, what's your rudder to get through that? And I think it is those really interpersonal relationships that you have at the community level. And that's what's continuing to hold our work together right now. It's not that Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation has an inherent relationship with any particular government agency. It's that I have a personal relationship with particular people on the other side of the border. And we have a commitment to one another that we will support each other as friends and colleagues to make sure that we can continue to contribute to these shared goals that we have. We want good water quality. We want a safe environment. We want a resilient climate. However we have to do that, we're committed to doing it because we care about each other.
Absolutely. Can we talk a bit about the center of your work at the Lake of the Woods Water Sustainability Foundation, which is water quality monitoring, but with a community-based science perspective on that? Yeah. So, I mean, this seems so ripe as well. So again, in a sense, science is kind of at the center, right? With this notion that if we don't know how the water quality is, we can't trace what's making it better or worse, right? We don't know where to intervene. But then you've got this dual mandate, which is kind of perfect for Sam's master research, where it's partly about understanding those biophysical relationships, but then also partly about using that as a way to bring people in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah. So our role at the foundation, we don't do the field work. We don't do the science ourselves. It's basically exactly the same structure as Climate Action Network. We are a secretariat that sits at the hub of a network of scientists and NGOs and civil society and policymakers, so political levels of government and like field staff, agency staff of governments. And our work involves bringing together science and policy and communicating that out to the public and receiving the public feedback and buy-in that supports the success of policy implementation in the long run. So we do the work of convening the scientists, the field personnel from the agencies who are out there gathering, water quality monitoring data, fisheries data, satellite imagery of cyanotoxic blooms on Lake of the Woods. And then we bring them into spaces where they can work across agencies collaboratively to review data and information, identify data gaps, figure out strategies for filling those data gaps, figuring out how they can cooperate, how they can leverage resources in a very resource-limited environment, and then come up with the best possible science to inform policy. And then as needed, we also go and do the political advocacy, the lobbying meetings if we need to, or taking, quiet behind the scenes meetings with different policy-making groups to try to advocate for whatever policy interventions we need to be able to maintain good water quality for Lake of the Woods.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've done such fantastic work, Teika, and it's so inspiring as like a young scientist myself. I'm wondering if you have any advice for other people, perhaps myself included, trying to do similar work or kind of getting into this field of setting up networks and coordinating them. Like it's just so impressive. What advice would you have?
Be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious about other people. Be genuinely and authentically curious about people and listen to their stories. I think science is fantastic. Science is, it's a tool for making inquiry about the world around you, and it gives you a process through which you can make inquiry in a systematic way, in a logical and a logical progressive sequence of questioning that helps you to refine your knowledge. It's a super important tool, but it can't be divorced from the real world and the relationships that we have with one another. So, I mean, I am a perennially curious person. I'm so insatiably curious about all kinds of things. I am one of those people who will talk to a stranger on a plane, which horrifies my husband. But like I am genuinely really interested in other people, and learning how they see the world and what ideas they have about problems and solutions. And I think that is a level of curiosity that many scientists have, but tend not to think about it in the social context as much. And like, just be brave. Don't worry about looking crazy. Going on talking to strangers. Talk to strangers. It's great. You'll meet lots of people and do interesting things in your life if you're always curious.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's incredible
That's my
advice.
big advice.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
No, I think it is. It's beautiful. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We've had a wonderful conversation.
Amazing. We had high hopes.
Fun.
But you've absolutely lived up to every one of them. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, thanks.
Mhm.
Well, this has been really a lot of fun. I'm so happy to reconnect Kai and to meet you, Sam. Yeah, I hope that your studies go really well.
Thank you so much. It was really nice meeting you as well.
And now for a short message from one of our conservation allies.
False Creek matters a lot to me just because it allows me and others to really connect with nature, even though we're living in a giant city.
We're fundamentally connected to the water bodies and the surroundings that we're in.
Blue spaces in particular are good for our mental and physical health.
Welcome aboard. I'm Zeta, and this is Water Bodies, a podcast from False Creek Friends.
The reality is that False Creek is actually quite alive.
How do we navigate the protection of these places that we love?
What do you imagine False Creek might look like in the next 10 to 20 years?
False Creek can become a beacon and a place to showcase the conservation efforts that are happening throughout the rest of British Columbia.
What it means to be a steward of a land.
Watch, listen, and subscribe to Water Bodies, wherever you get your podcasts. And visit falsecreekfriends.org to learn more.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Small Planet Heroes. Small Planet Heroes is a production of Cosphere, a project of the University of British Columbia. UBC is situated on the unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. Our guest this week was Teika Newton. Check out our show links in the episode description to learn more about their work and their ongoing projects. Small Planet Heroes was created by our executive producer, Dr. Kai Chan. This episode was edited by me, Emma Jarek-Samard, and production is by Maya O'Donnell, Sam Blackwell, Emma Jarek-Samard, and Claire Price. Your hosts this week were Dr. Kai Chan and Sam Blackwell. Our show coordinators are Claire Price, Sam Blackwell, Maya O'Donnell, Nancy Kang, and Emma Jarek-Samard. Special thanks to Jai Ranganathan, Bilal Bartai, Elizabeth Yee, Katie Kathirson, Nancy Kang, Anahita Siraji, Sarah Klein, and Seda Schneider. Our theme song was written and performed by Daniel Forrest. Our interviews are conducted and recorded at UBC Studios. If you would like to join our community of Small Planet Heroes, check out cosphere.net. If you would like to support us, subscribe to our podcast channel, rate the show, and follow us on Instagram at Small Planet Heroes. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it and spread the word. Thank you for listening.